So I'll show you the scene we're working on. Um, I'm not going to give away too many details about the scene. If Kevin shows up from MRU Studios, then he can give us more information about the scene if he wants to. But basically, this part I'm doing now is going to have this aircraft carrier and a few other ships uh, move across a plane, which is going to have the ocean modifier installed on it, so that it looks like waves in the water. And then, so this object here is going to be our fluid simulation. And I've also created a duplicate of the ship here. I'll show you that. So this object here is a super low poly version of the hull of the ship. And this will allow me to do um, a much simpler to run simulation instead of trying to use the entire ship model. So, for instance, I have 258 vertices on the scene right now, which are the points on the mesh. So 258 is all I have. Now, if I turn on the actual ship, that jumps up to almost 608,000 vertices. So, anytime you're simulating, the size and complexity of um, the models you're running and the fluid uh, definitely add a lot to the time that it takes to bake. And I see a comment here that says it doesn't look great. That is unfortunate. I know that I have. Okay, that definitely looks like it worked on my end. uh, okay, there we go. Again, sorry about that. Trying to get it set up. I really had high hopes for Starlink internet, and so far have not had the experience I wanted. Um, but yeah, so I guess for now you guys get 720p 30 frame per second stream. So, um, but it is what it is. Um, uh-oh. Edgar the Face says switch to 144p and froze again. Um, I I also haven't been moving the scene around very much yet. Hopefully maybe that's it. Okay. Yeah, I did stop moving, by the way. But yeah, let me know. Keep let me know what's going on. Sorry about it. But we'll try to proceed and see what happens. But so the whole of the ship that I have here, I'm going to use to interact with the water. So I'm just going to set up a simple keyframe to get it moving. And actually, it does look like this ocean modifier is running. So we're going to actually shut that off for now because that's going to slow us down really bad. Okay, and then we need the ship to move. Get on my end. It looks like Kevin is here. MRU Studios. He is he is the one that is going to use this, assuming I can ever get it to work, which we will. We'll get it to go, but he's making a scene with multiple ships that fits into his um, series of short videos that he's making on YouTube. So you can see his name in the chat there. Go check his stuff out. He's got some cool stuff on his channel, a lot of good tutorials, and he's got a few series that he works on. So check that out. But he's in here now. Yeah, and he just said here in the chat he has a really nice ocean modifier set up on his end for the show. So I had one in here just to try to get the fluid sims to blend with the ocean modifier, but he's got a much better one with really good material on it. So you guys will be able to see that, I'm sure. But let's see, what else do we have? Edgar the Face says that he restarted the stream He or she, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm assuming based on the Edgar, but um, Edgar the Face just restarted the stream quickly. Works nicely now. Maybe the iPad app is a bit fiddly. I don't know. I don't know if it's anyone but my fault on this, but I guess I'll just stick with these settings for the near future anyway, so that it doesn't get so glitchy. But anyway, so we want our ship to move across the area where the simulation is going to be. I can't make the water interact with the object as easily as I can make the object pass through the water. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So let's do that. So I set a keyframe. I set a keyframe at the frame 0. My timeline runs from frame 70 to 600, but I'll end up adjusting that. So I'm going to just go to the end here. 600 frames will end up being about 100. What do we have? 60. We'll probably do 30 frames per second, maybe. Normally it's set to 24 by default. So that's quite a long animation, but we'll see what it looks like, and then we'll adjust. Anyway, so I'm going to move the ship along the X direction till it passes through the simulation area. We'll just go right out. And then I'm going to add a keyframe. So now I have the ship moving through the water over this amount of time. So now what that will allow me to do is place my fluid simulation where this object here, which is an old domain actually, from an original test, but we'll probably make a new one. So our ship will move through the water will interact with the ship, and then we'll start to play with settings and get it to be super, super high resolution. But the goal is to create an animated mesh that's about this size. It's kind of about the size of the ship. And as the ship moves and these waves are created, I hope to be able to take the mesh it generates and just have it follow the ship. So we'll see if that works or not. But if that doesn't work, then I guess we'll just make the simulation the entire length, and it'll just be a much bigger file. But either way, we'll get her done. So I don't really need the water all the way back here, so I'm going to move it a little closer to our domain. And then we need to move it up. So I'll just do that like this. Okay, now I feel like these old objects are just going to kind of be confusing. So I'll just get rid of them, otherwise they'll cause problems. So the goal of this is just to have the top surface be what moves, and anything else, anything below, will completely be invisible. So we don't want to spend a bunch of computation resources on moving things below. So what I really need to do is figure out where this water level is going to sit. Let's get the real ship back on here. Oops, GX. Yeah, that'll probably be close. Yeah. So we'll leave it where it is in the up and down position. I'll turn this ship back off now that we know. And then as this thing moves across, it'll deform the top of this plane. Okay, so really what we need to do is we need to bring up the bottom of this. And the only reason I'm messing with this so much right now is because I don't want to have to run this simulation and then come back and completely change the mesh that we're going to use, because it's going to just make it way more work. So if I scrub through to about here, that looks like that should be plenty of water depth. So we'll leave that for now. Let me go ahead and save my file, because you never know when you're going to need an actual saved version. MRU Studio says, for the final bake simulation you create and send, will the ship actually have to be moving on my end to create the wake? The ship won't have to move to create the wake, I think what you'd be able to do is just have the pre-baked animated mesh follow the ship. So you would just parent the baked mesh to the ship, basically. And then as it moves through the scene, however that happens, whether the water moves or whether the ship moves, um, the wake that is generated from this simulation should still look directional, if that makes sense. So it should still kind of fall off to the back and to the sides, meaning that if you actually took this and had this move along the ship, it would still look really nice. So I think there's multiple ways we can do it. The easiest would probably be just to do the entire, like basically just to do this and have it flow through the entire length of the path. But um, once we know settings that look good, I can also rerun it and we can basically test it again and see if it looks like that's what we want to do. But theoretically, you can bake the simulated mesh using the export to Alembic, which is this right here. And you can export the animated mesh and then the whitewater particle mesh and have it just uh, become an object. Could make the ocean move while the ship is stationary. Yeah, I think so. And once it's baked, it's just a animated object, so it won't have any interaction anymore. So you won't be able to like have it follow your ship, I guess. So we will have to coordinate back and forth to make sure that it gets done the way that it needs to get done. But for now, I think the biggest thing is I want to kind of test it and see if this sort of scale will look decent or not. Because obviously there would be other ways to kind of fake it instead of doing a massive scale simulation. But anyway, for now, think think that hopefully answered your question. Just like everything in Blender, there's multiple ways to do it, and none of them are easy. Let's do water surface here. So this object, I'm renaming this object here just to actually be the water. And then I am going to I'm going to set the origin of this back to its center just to prevent any problems. Okay, so this is going to be our water. Then what I'm going to do is duplicate this object, and then I'm going to call this, let's just call it domain. That shouldn't cause a problem. And then we need to scale it up slightly. So now if I look at this in X-ray mode, I can see that the domain is slightly larger than the water. Maybe we'll scale it a little more. That should work, but we'll test it in a second. So normally, when I do fluid simulations, what I'll do is I'll start the fluids because they start off as like just this rigid rectangular object. Um, let's see. MRU Studio says he's wondering because the ships are not moving in the scene right now. I have all the camera work and animation complete. Yeah, no, I think we'll be able to move the simulated mesh, and so it should work either way, basically. Making the ocean move instead of the actual ships would simplify things, but we'll see. I can do whatever's necessary. Yeah, no, we'll figure it out. We the biggest thing is we got to see what kind of file size this is and get some settings tuned up, and then we'll go from there. But and he says thanks for doing this. Yeah, no, it's fun, and like I've told you before, it gives me something to work on. It's good to have some sort of a direction to know what to do next. So that's awesome. Okay. So that we actually probably hide that. We definitely don't want our water to go over the ship. So maybe before I get too crazy here, I'll scale this down even a little bit in the Z and then move it in Z. Um, I don't think that'll cause an issue. No, that'll probably work. Yeah. I just want to make sure that the water stays within the area of the ship. Okay, and then I need to make sure the fluid is inside of the domain, so I'm going to move this down. It's probably hard to see on your screen, but this in here is the fluid and this is the domain. So fluid domain, the domain just has to be bigger than the fluid and not by much, especially since the scale of this is so massive. So I'm just going to get all the dimensions of the domain to be slightly larger than the fluid. Okay, and then I am going to start adding properties for this. So I'm going to come to the Flip Fluids menu. And with the object that I've called domain, I'm going to hit Create Domain. And now you can see that domain became a kind of transparent box with just the borders. And then this guy in here, we are going to call that a fluid. Okay, so now you can see that they're both just these transparent boxes. When I run this simulation, those will change. The domain will go away. The fluid surface will look like whatever material we assign to it. Okay, so let's do that. So now Flip Fluids is a little interesting. Some of the settings are in this context menu here, and some of them are actually under the physics properties. So a lot of the general settings are um, are over here in the actual physics properties section. But there's a whole bunch of baking settings. So one thing I always have to do is I have to start the simulation earlier than my actual animated timeline, because if I don't, then the object will be basically moving already, and the water won't be ready, if you will. So it'll look like the water starts as this big rectangle, and then all of a sudden it just drops. So you don't want your object interacting with it while it's doing that. You want the fluid to settle out and kind of start to behave the way you want, and then have your object interact with it. So that's what we're going to work on. So let's just start getting our settings going. So where are we at here? So to change most of the settings, you have to have the domain selected. So I'll do that, and then we're going to start with a super low resolution of 65, which is actually the preset. And we're not going to turn on anything like whitewater yet. We're just going to see how this works. And if you're using Flip Fluids or any simulator, save all the time, because it really will cause a lot of problems. Animated mesh. Okay, and then the only other thing we need to do is select the ship, and that needs to be an obstacle. So in this context menu here, I have the ship selected. I hit obstacle, and now under the Flip Fluids collection, this object is an obstacle that will interact with the water. So supposedly this will work. So I am going to start the bake. Let's just see how our settings progress. Now right here you can see the baking progress. It shouldn't have much to do until the ship hits the water. So we'll see if that is true. Well, it's not going too slow. It's always funny with Flip Fluids while you're running it. You can kind of tell if it's working or not, because like this is running too fast, I would say. So it definitely seems like the fluid's not interacting with the boat, but we'll see. So I start to run this, and there's nothing to see yet. And the reason for that is I have to add a material to this guy here. Yeah, it's doing something, just not very fast. Okay, so then let's see, water surface. We need to find fluids materials for the surface. So when I actually do this for the real scene, I'm going to end up having to use. Well, let's just do this one. I think this is a ocean scene water. So it's a kind of a green ocean colored water with foam in it. Um, but when we actually run it for MRU Studios scene, it'll be a material that matches the ocean modifier. Okay, so now definitely doesn't look like this interacted with it yet. So we need to figure out what's going on in the scene here. Um, Resolution should be fine for something this big. Just wondering why we never got a fluid to appear. This this here should just be a fluid. We shouldn't need an inflow or an outflow is like a constant, uh, like a fluid emitter, or it destroys the fluid. So you don't want that if you just want it to be a set amount of water. Let's reset this bake. Maybe let's start it at. Oh, let's see what frame does the ship start to interact. Yeah, so let's start it at like 60 or 70 maybe. And then let's make sure. Edgar the face. Um yeah, sorry about the time zone for you. Edgar the face is always on my videos, especially the tech ones commenting and stuff. So I'm definitely I'm definitely going to have to get on some streams early in the mornings so that they're not such a bad time for you. Poor man Pokemon popped in. Hello. Is this the place to get good info? Well, yes, as long as you like 720p 30. But now that we have it figured out, yeah, we should be good to go. Thanks for joining the live stream. Um, okay, so we need to restart this bake. I do have. So let's look at our meshes. So the ship is fairly large. I know one other problem with simulations. Your your objects that you're interacting with, normally it helps to have a thickness to them. So I may have to add uh, a modifier for that, and then the fluid shouldn't be a problem. So I'm not sure what that's doing. Um, I would say I'd subdivide it once, but that shouldn't matter for fluid. So maybe let's just increase the resolution a little and see if that makes the difference. Yeah, let's try that. Let's just see. This guy here, it may be that I didn't export the animated mesh too. I mean, that shouldn't be the biggest problem here, but let's try it. So we're gonna bake it. Okay, yeah, now you can see the progress is much slower. So at very least, it seems like the simulation is actually doing something this time before it wasn't. Oh, well, I guess maybe I need to turn the mesh on. That probably would help too, huh? So where did I have this start at? 70. So theoretically, once you get a few frames baked, you should be able to see a fluid pop up as like a mesh on the screen. There we go. Look at me forgetting what buttons. All right. Edgar the Face says it's fine. Used to interact with the US guys during the nighttime. Lived in California for half a year. Yeah, I mean, especially weekends, and if I have days off or whatever, I'll definitely move my streams around because I have subscribers from everywhere. So I'd like for everyone to have a chance to get on live if they want to. But thanks for well, I guess to be getting up early or staying up late to be here. That's awesome. Poor man Pokemon says, not on topic, but I got my antelope back from the taxidermist today. Awesome, that's cool. Yeah, that's fun. Um, all right. Looks like our simulation's actually starting to work. Okay, cool. So, what you're seeing right here is there's sort of this drawdown by the ship. That means that the fluid is interacting with the ship. We definitely want some more like rippling and stuff, but the very first thing I always do is make sure that it's interacting so that I have my physics set up and obviously like turn the mesh on so I can see it, which I had forgot for a few minutes. But let's start here. So I think one other thing we need to do that I've just realized is this domain is so close to the top of the ship or of the water surface, it's probably not allowed to go up. We want it to push the water away and up, not down and under. So the domain needs to be a little bigger. So I'm going to pause this bake. Actually, I'm going to reset it. That's the other unfortunate thing about simulating is once you've realized there's a problem, you can't really use what you've already done unless you get lucky and it's something that's not like related. But you probably aren't going to get that, unfortunately. So here I'm just going to scale up my domain, and then I'm actually going to move this up a little bit so that the water can go upward. Okay, and we're starting with a pretty low resolution, but when I do the final version of this, I'm going to have to crank it up to a much, much higher number. Orman Pokemon says, hung up the antelope in the basement. I think my dog thinks it's his new buddy. Yeah. Yeah, that's fun though. That's cool. It's fun to get something back like that. Scroll this by X. I just want the fluid. I don't want it to settle out too much to the sides. I just want it to be able to ripple upward. So let's try this. I'll bake it again. See, the ship moves through it nice and easy. So what you saw there was the ship moves through because it's got keyframes, and the simulator will export the keyframed animated objects that the fluid has to work with at the front end. So you see all your stuff move around, and then it comes back and generates the actual fluid mesh. Let's see now. Hopefully this gives us a little better result. And a lot of the like the drawdown and stuff like that not looking great is just going to be partly because this doesn't have enough resolution. So if you look at the fluid surface here that it generated, it's not really, I'll say, specific enough. It's not a dense enough mesh to be able to show a complex wave like that. So that's most of our problem. Um, and then the other thing that you can see here, it's kind of hard. There's a lot of going on, but your um, wow, actually that's pretty interesting. The fluid, why is the fluid so high? Definitely starting to work. Um, Edgar the Face says, just looked at Flip Fluids, 80 bucks, is it worth it? Way nicer or easier than the built-in options, or um, or am I used to using it? Yeah, so I got Flip Fluids because it, and I don't know, maybe Blender simulators are better now, but they were um, a lot slower when I started to do fluid simulations. Flip Fluids will allow you to use all of your CPU cores. So actually, let me pull up Task Manager just to show you. So this is the um, 5950X processor, 32 threads. So when I run this, I'll show you. And actually, I need to figure out why my fluid mesh didn't drop down. Let's reset the bake. And then I'll start it. The ship moves again. Once we get a few of these frames started, I'll be able to see it. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. It's definitely starting the fluid too high. I wonder why that happened. But yeah, I mean, Flip Fluids, $80 one time is what it costs. So you don't have to renew it. Um, and it uses all of the CPU, which is a quite a big deal if you have a lot of threads. The old versions of the simulator in Blender would not allow you to use all of the threads, and unfortunately, you can't GPU accelerate um, a fluid simulation yet. Let's see. MRU Studio says, I didn't see it in the Flip Fluids navigation panel, but can you set the viewport to a different resolution than the final render for the simulation? Yes, you can. I'll scroll down here. There's a surface display. You can make it a preview and a final. And then I think let's go into the domain here and go down to the options. You can also change. Where's that setting? There's a lot of settings in here, by the way. Yeah, there's a preview resolution and a full resolution. So the this context panel here where it says final or preview, if I have that checked on to final, it'll show you this 120 resolution. If I have it checked on the preview, it'll show you the reduced one. And then you can actually type in whatever you want. So it doesn't change the speed of the simulation at all to like have it set in the preview. It just makes the playback faster, if that makes sense. So it's still going to calculate the full 120, and then it's just going to basically unsubdivide the mesh to show you the preview one. But I think I figured out why. Yeah, so I have to export an animated mesh for the fluid because I've moved it around, and I hadn't updated that. So now when I start baking this yet again, it should be okay. The problem I was having was the fluid was just floating up in the air for some reason. Let's check again. And if you haven't, yeah, there we go. Look, that fixed it. So your objects in your scene, you're probably going to have to you select your object, your fluid, or your um, interaction object, your obstacle, and you're going to have to check on the export animated mesh check box so that the any changes you make when you rebake will get pushed through. Okay, so now let's look here. Hard to tell yet. But yeah, so basically what I would do though is I would run a very general one like this to get general like type and size figured out. Like, okay, yeah, I want to see the ship goes. Oh, there we go. So it is starting to move. Huh. It's a little extreme, but we'll keep tuning it. That's what we're doing here. Yeah, look at that. That's maybe a little bit too big, huh? Okay, we can fix that. But yeah, so I want to do general type and size. Like I want to decide, okay, if my ship starts over here and ends up over here, is this enough of a simulation? Do I need to have it stick back to the back or forward further? And just kind of generally get the animation set up so that we're good to go on that end. And then um, I can come in and crank up the resolution and run a few frames and just see if the mesh looks decent. And then I come back again and we'll add the whitewater particles, which are the foam that you would see from the water splashing or moving around violently. And those make a huge difference in terms of realism. You basically have to have that or it won't look right. But so and while I'm talking, just so you're aware, it's still baking the scene. So I'm not like just blabbing for no reason. I'm waiting for it to bake, but um, yeah, there's the problem. We need more resolution, and it's just iterations after iterations of testing until you finally like what it spits out. But um, you can see it's already slowing down really bad, and it says frame 98 out of 531, which is frame 168 is the last one we have. But yeah, so like this is way too low resolution because it's just making these big bubbles in the fluid. And actually, this kind of looks broken because the fluid shouldn't be able to get above the domain by this much. So I'm going to have to look into that too. But you can see that the boat is interacting with the water. Yeah, Edgar the Face says, crazy how long it still takes on the 5950X. Yes, there is. Oh yeah, here I forgot I was going to show that. Here's the usage graph for all of the different cores, and I'll pull it down a little so you can see it's still baking. It doesn't use them all fully all the time, but it makes use of each one. So you can kind of see the issue with fluid simulations is it's not able to use every single core all the time to its max. And let's see, 9 gigs of RAM. That's not too bad, but let me make sure because there is one other setting that I can check here. Uh, but yeah, it is. It's crazy how hard it is to run this sort of a process. Let's see. Somewhere in here, there's a checkbox that lets you change how many threads are available for the simulator to use. Because obviously we want to use as many threads on the processor as we can. I just can't remember where that is. Normally I don't change it, but cache, settings, substeps, pressure. Yeah, and Flip Fluids is crazy too. It has uh, scrolling through these settings just reminded me, but it's got like a whole bunch of different things you can do because you can also come in here and add things like surface tension and where are those? White water effects, which are the foam and the bubbles. You can add viscosity so that the fluid flows like caramel or super slow like glass or really fast and thin. It's pretty crazy. let's see. This multi-threading option doesn't look like. Yeah, I can't remember where it is, but so the normal simulator in Blender hopefully has caught up to, because I have no problems with this, but if there's if the native one in Blender works well, then you might as well at least try it before you go out and spend $80. But yeah, I mean here's 32 threads. A few of them are getting used. Yeah, that is weird. I feel like it does. It normally uses more. Multi-threading option down there. Where did you say that you saw it on the screen somewhere? Because I know there's some in the performance settings, but that's for rendering normally. Yeah, but so then I do know for a fact one of the other factors in multi-threading versus not being able to multi-thread in fluid simulators is that this is interacting quite a bit. I think probably a lot of the problem that it's having right now is, see, the fluid is clipping through the ship a little bit. It's got these kind of these little puddles on top. It's probably more having errors. Um, but if we crank up this resolution, it's going to use a lot more threads. So what happens, and the reason you can't do this on a GPU yet, is each one of these cores is running a process, or probably, I guess, a certain number of the points on the mesh. And computers aren't good at splitting up this type of work because each frame that it's baking is related to the frame before it. So unlike pixels in, like, when your GPU is running a scene when you're playing a game, unlike that, this process has to be based on the previous frame or it doesn't look good. It doesn't make any sense. So what you're seeing here is it's only using one, two, three, four, five, six, probably six of the threads to their fullest, and the rest of them are running background processes. So if I go to the processes in Task Manager here, Blender is only using 10% of the CPU, and that's because uh, these other cores can't help on the process that these six of them are working on, if that makes sense. So if I go in and I crank up the resolution to like 300 or 400, which is what I'll do for the final one, then all of a sudden most of these threads will be used up. So, but for now, there's just not enough. There's not enough work for all of the threads to do, and they don't get together and split up the workloads, unfortunately. So if you're gonna get a processor for fluid simulating, 5950X is great if you're gonna use high resolutions, but I wouldn't go get a Threadripper. Don't go get 64 cores, because you're gonna get like um, a whole bunch of cores not doing anything unless the resolution is just 8 billion, and you don't want to do that anyway, because I'll show you this here too. um, Flip Fluids gives you the stats for the scene, so keep in mind we've done 143 out of 531 frames, and this is low resolution, and the surface is already 112 megabytes, and this gives you the stats on like how long it's taking for each frame. But yeah, so it's spent 3 minutes on velocity, 4 minutes on pressure, 2 minutes on objects. So it tells you what you've used up resources wise. But um, yeah, you definitely want high core speed, but you also want a few threads. So somewhere between 8 and 16 core processor is probably the most that you'll really get efficient use out of, unfortunately. Because as much as I want a Threadripper, you just can't justify them because this won't use it anyway. PS Art ETH is here. Hello. Hello, hello. Um yeah, yeah, playing around with PBO and Curve Optimizer, doing a little overclocking basically. Honestly, I really could because yeah, I'm running, what am I at? 4.5-ish. Uh but yeah, to get these few threads to go up to about 5 gigahertz, I could. I definitely don't normally manually overclock very much, and I know PBO is not necessarily manual, but um, really what I'll probably do in the near future is try to go up to maybe a 7950X 3D. Uh, maybe not. I'm kind of afraid of the motherboards having some power issues and stuff like that, but I've been super curious to see if the extra 3D cache in those new processors will help with simulations because a lot of this data that has to get passed back and forth to the RAM, especially, is stuff that would be stored in that 3D cache. So I'm curious. But I can't find anybody else to test that because it's just a question that no one asks. So, I'll probably have to be the one that tests it. But yeah, that's exactly the question, Edgar the Face, is if the X models or the X3D are better because you lose some clock speed with the 3D, but I think a lot of the data this runs on is stuff that gets stored in the uh, L2 and L1 cache on the processor. So having a bigger, which is basically for anyone watching who's not a complete nerd, um, like I am, the the cache on the processor is very fast access memory that's inside of the CPU instead of going out, which is to the system RAM, and that's relatively far away and relatively slow. So if you can access a bunch of these little tiny changes in this mesh and store them inside the processor instead of reaching out for them, it makes it a lot faster, supposedly. So I'd like to be able to test an X3D versus a normal X model of AMD, but it's one thing to test GPUs because they just you plug them in, you take them out, that's it, whatever. Processors, especially between generations, obviously I need entire new motherboards and RAM, and that just gets way too expensive. Maybe if we can get AMD to start sending me some samples, or Intel or whoever. But Edgar says wanting to upgrade from 3900X to something new and couldn't decide between 7800X 3D, 7950X 3D, or 7950X. So I got the 5950X and wait for 8000s. I'm kind of in that boat. I'm thinking like maybe at this point wait and see what comes out. Otherwise, Threadripper 7000 with the 16 core version of that would be good because it'll be a lot like the 7950X, except it'll have a whole bunch of lanes for GPUs. But yeah, I mean, 5950X is definitely a great one, and that should probably last you for about forever, really. I mean, and like for sculpting and stuff, that's going to be plenty of power. But but yeah, that's the problem with all this hardware stuff is once you realize that you're at the limit of what the hardware can do, there's just no other options. And like this scene here, it's slowed down a lot, and we're doing a frame maybe once a minute, and this is nowhere near the speed we want to be at, and this is nowhere near the resolution, but there's just nothing to do about it. It's just a lot of waiting. You can try to overclock, you can try to add cores, and there's just at some point you just run out of anything else to do other than just sit and wait and hope it works. But while this is sitting here, let's look at oh, I gotta go to No, we're in cycles. Let me turn off the... let's do this. I have a couple HDRs in here that are nice. Here is what the fluid surface looks like just on its own, and I'll turn the overlays off. And why is this so noisy? Goodness. Viewport noise threshold, let's just put that to 0.01. And then 2048. How about that? Yeah, that looks a little better. So here's what our actual water looks like at this point. So that's kind of cool. You can see it's reflecting the clouds from the HDR. So let's move our ship into it a little bit. So now obviously we don't want the fluid going over the top of the ship, but keep in mind when we put this guy back on and it's going to follow our little fake ship here, you won't see any of that clipping through the ship anyway, so it won't matter. But let's move this along. Oh, that's funny. I didn't realize how close I got those. I didn't actually line up the collision object and the real model of the ship here, but I got within that far, so that's pretty good, I guess. But let's look. Yeah, so it looks like our mesh is working. We're going to need a lot more resolution, and I will tell you that playing around with the viewport and stuff is definitely going to make the baking slow down because your CPU still runs all the processes to some extent. And it looks like, yeah, we're using a little more CPU now. Now we're at 20%. But, I mean, really, just as a very, very uh, general start, let's turn this off. And let's move our keyframes up for this guy. Where did they go? I know they have them because the ship is moving. Oh, I must not be on the mesh or on the right mesh. Um, Kevin, if you're in here still, do you remember which one of these has the root bone in it? Oh, there we go. Never mind, I found it. I'm just going to try to get this ship to line up with our simulation a little bit better. Because really, this kind of looks cool already. And let's just see what it looks like when we get some real stuff going. Okay. So they both go from 0 to 600 on the frame. 0 to 600, so I just need to start this guy at the same spot. Kind of like that. Okay. And then, oh, oops, moved the wrong thing there. Want to move the bones. This thing has quite a bit of rigging on it. So I'll actually do it like this. We'll apply that one, then we'll go to 600. And we'll move this forward again. So the front line's up. That is off the screen. And then we'll apply this keyframe. Okay, so now the ship follows our collision object better. And then we can go back to our preview and we'll turn off our, let's call this our collision. These naming conventions are starting to get confusing. But now when I move this up, yeah, now you can see very low resolution version of the fluid displacing around the ship. Why are you still... There's this little tiny triangle right there. What are you doing? That one is supposed to be hidden. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a good screenshot there. So basically, the big difference will be um, the waves will be scaled to fit properly, so it doesn't look like a toy. And then you'll have white water particles on it, so that it looks more natural. And then Kevin, hopefully Kevin, you hopefully don't mind that I'm using your name on this. Yell at me in the chat if you don't want me to, but um, we'll have to get together to see how the surface you have for your ocean modifier matches to the whitewater particles, because predicting what they look like, yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll see how it matches. But I mean, that's just what you do. You go back and forth. Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. I hadn't thought of that. And um, yeah, it is kind of too late, isn't it? Oops. I'll use MRU Studios from now on. Sorry about that, but I have worked with MRU Studios on learning and Blender stuff for a few months, and I've got we've got to that first name basis, I guess. So sorry about that. But yeah, I will we'll have to compare files, because the other thing you can do with whitewater is after you've already baked the whitewater particles, they just become particles, and you can scale them um, like about their own centers, basically, all those little tiny teeny particles. But if you scale them down, we can make the lines of the white um, for your ocean modifier surface. We can make that match the particles that I have on the fluid simulation. So I think we can play with it a lot without even having to like really get together too much on material, because I can also take the material you used for your water and throw it onto the simulated mesh. So there's options. Um, yeah, so here's a very quick version of the fluid mesh. I mean, you can see it's working, it's just not specific enough. So let's turn off the ship again one more time. All right, are we on the preview or the final? Yeah, we are on the final surface display. But yeah, this is as small as our simulation can get. So we definitely will need to crank it up. Yeah, it's taking a bit longer than I would expect, and I'm wondering why. The the simulation, it should tell us in the simulator has um it actually has a debugging program inside of it too, which is super cool. So it gives you stats about the scene, but it also tells you what part is taking forever. And if you come into the fluid debug here, you can turn on a bunch of stuff like particle debugging or whatever, and it'll actually kind of analyze your simulation and tell you issues with it. So if I turn on this display grid, this is telling me the shape and size of the voxels, which are just 3D vertices, 3D vertex, yeah, 3D vertices that um, the simulator uses as like one piece of material. So that's the display grid. So that's showing you how big the pieces of fluid are. And then the boundary, that's easy enough. But there's a lot of these tools in here that the built-in simulators in Blender don't have. And Flip Fluids is anything fluids, so you can use whatever material you want, obviously, or you can use the pre-built-in materials it comes with. And it also has settings for foam, bubble, spray, and dust, which are all just different like mesh effects that it throws on there for adding realism depending on what you're doing. All right. Yeah, so at this point, like now that I've seen what the simulation kind of looks like, you can see it's doing what we expect it to. The real end goal here is to maybe make this a little wider. Obviously, there's not a lot of room for the wake to disperse off to the sides. So we'll make this um maybe I don't know, this wide. I'll have to look up some images actually. But make it about this wide so the wake can trail off. The goal is to have the wake trail off to the side as the ship moves so that it looks like it kind of connects back into the ocean. So let me turn back on our ocean modifier here somewhere. Where did I have that? Hopefully I didn't delete it. There's our ship. I don't know where I put it, which is fine. We need to. Oh, you know what? It's probably in here. I bet it is. But ocean mesh. Yeah, maybe. There it is. So the goal of the fluid simulation is to have this trail off to the side and kind of just meld into the ocean modifier that MRU Studios has created. So what he's done is he's taken this same modifier that it just displaces a plane like this to look like an ocean, and then with shaders, and I saw an earlier version of it, and even that looked super cool. But uh, this is animated to look like waves on the ocean. And I actually need to go turn that back on if we want to see it. My computer is going to just hate me. Actually, yeah, that's good. Let's save it. Maybe that's a good idea. Ocean, this guy. Oh, it looks like simulating is on. Might have to clear the. Oh, I'm outside of the range. That's why. So here you can see sort of. Try to get a way to view it. This orange surface here is the ocean. So as I tab through the frames, you can see that it moves, and it's just making those little waves. And you can do that all just with keyframes. So you just tell it to start at whatever and start it at whatever. But yeah, so he's got one of those set up that has super great material. It's got a lot of like whitewater looking particles to it already, but it's all just shader, I believe. So it's also going to run way faster than mine because this simulation is all extra mesh, and the one he's got is done by a lot of um, tricky shaders, but it also looks just as realistic. So this fluid will slide right into the ocean modifier fluid, and it'll just look like it's all one whole thing. So when it's all said and done, it should look super cool. This is actually, I think this is claiming it got done, so let's check it out. All right, so it's running slow because the ocean modifier is keyframed here. And then now it's out of it, so it shouldn't be too bad. Let's turn our ship back on. And then start about here, and I'm going to go to playback options. I'm going to frame drop. So um, the 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 playback in the viewport here will just drop frames that um, slow it down, so it'll try to run at a faster pace. Yeah, there you go. So basically, these waves will just trail off into the ocean modifier, and it'll look like it just goes back to being calm outside away from the ship. So that's the goal. So what we want to do is we want to take that mesh once we're done with it and export it to an animated surface, kind of like this ocean modifier, so that over time, um, as the timeline runs, the waves will just run, and it's already done. There's no more baking. I don't have to send him the entire fluid bake because it's huge. The fluid fluid files they're terrible. Let me show you this. So this one's done. Let's go down to the scene stats. And so this one is 363 megabytes already, which isn't like awful. We could still send it, but resolution on this works even worse than like screen resolution. So if you go from 1080p to 4K, you're not going up 4 times. You're going up the dimensions times the dimensions. So you're going up 4 times, 8 times, whatever it is. If you go um, on this, it's the same principle, except for now you have 3 directions because you're dealing with a 3D vertice, which is called a voxel again. So you have X, Y, and Z multiplying together to make it really, really, really massive. So uh, I've had a couple, like, I think they were about 600 frames fluid simulations, and the baking file, not even kidding, was most of a terabyte for just the one. What is that? 900 frames, I think, was one divided by 24 frames per second. So for 38 seconds of simulating, it was like 800 gigabytes just in file size. It's awful. So it looks super cool, but like I can't send that. There's no easy way to upload that and have somebody download it. So once we get it all said and done and we bake this, it's going to be hopefully something we can send and then just um, parent it to the ship and have it move along the ship just for the effect, and it won't have to rerun anything. So that's the goal. And I think it's exporting or baking as Alembic. So I'm gonna have to learn that still, but that's the way we're gonna do it. Otherwise, neither of us have the ability to store that much data or to send it. But MRU Studios says, I'm using procedural noise for some whitewater. I found the foam available with the ocean modifier doesn't always seem to look the best. It can sometimes look pixelated. The camera in my scenes are pretty far away from the ship and the ocean. The procedural whitewater looks fine. Yeah, the one we were looking at a week or two ago looked really nice, and the I believe in the scene the shot is going to be fairly far away, so it'll be some sort of a trailing camera and somewhere back here if I remember correctly. So you'll see it, but it's not going to be like you're not going to be right here and seeing a super detailed simulation off the side. At least not for this first version of it. So obviously we can come back and add that later, but that would almost even be easier. So, but yeah, so the very next step here, I'll reset it, but this is the part that's going to tank it. So now I know that the resolution needs to be a lot higher, um, and let's go look at that debug option, the display grid. So at very least, I want the resolution to be closer to the ocean modifier. So let's look. The ocean modifier is the orange one. It's these teeny tiny little squares versus these big green ones. So you can see there's easily 8 times as many in the ocean mod. Um, so we need to increase the simulation resolution by a whole lot. So I think at very least I'm going to double it. So let's just go 240. Yeah, I think we're still about 4 times too little. So let's try 320. Just these numbers don't mean much. They're kind of arbitrary. Yeah, let's see what that starts to do. And then we've already told it to export all the meshes when it rebakes. So we'll start the bake over. So now what I've done is I've overwritten the original bake that we just did, and basically we're starting fresh. But now our simulation mesh will be super high resolution, or kind of in the middle, I would say. And I'll see the first few frames and see if they look okay, and then I'll stop it and come back and crank it up to what I would call final, which honestly for this will probably be like maybe 1000. And then I'll just have to maybe clear out some old stuff and clean up some hard drive space because these things start to get so big. But let's turn a couple of these things off. Honestly, the ocean modifier, you might have to go for now too. And that should help our bake time just a little bit, but yeah, so now our fluid's going to be a lot more specific, but still not probably quite where it needs to be. What did I turn off? Collision object, that's pretty low poly, that can stay on there. Bake options, so yeah, resolution is now at 320. Debugging, let's leave the stats open. Yeah, and you so here's the CPU usage difference. So now the resolution is high enough that there's enough work for at least half of the cores to always be going. So the big difference here is now we have all of these threads doing something most of the time. So I think the main ones are running, just Windows, and, I'm streaming and doing all that stuff. But then you've got all these other cores are actually doing work now. And uh, it's still only saying about half usage, but I think that's because it's cumulative. So it's adding up. Some of them are working at some point, some of them aren't, if you will. So you can see how jagged these graphs are. But if you have like infinitely large planes to deal with, then it's just going to use more cores. So I guess yeah, if you really need massive simulations, then you would want something like a Threadripper. But let's turn our debug off here, our grid off, because that's just kind of in the way. And it looks like our fluid wants to go over the top, so I might actually have to maybe raise the top of this object up in the next iteration. This isn't actually running too slow, so that's good. But now you can see that it's starting to create a wake. You really need to play with PBO if electricity isn't too expensive. Actually, no, electricity here is pretty cheap. That's why I do a lot of this rendering stuff, because for most of the time I can get away with mining and running all these computers, and it's relatively cheap for me. But yeah, I mean, definitely overclocking. You can get around 4.6 to 4.7 gigahertz all core boost. Yes, and also this processor runs 24/7, so I'm sure there's probably a good chance that I need new thermal paste by now. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. But the other thing too about that is, while you're seeing low fours here for the processor speed, it's probably actually running each one of these threads a lot faster than that. It's just the work doesn't take very long. So you can see that they're super jagged. So if you could actually get this to be to where they were flat graphs, I bet it is probably more like 4.5. I think that's normally what it runs out on, um, like CPU tests or benchmarks. But but yes, like in this case, a 5 or 10% overclock would make a huge difference. When you've got all the threads working, that would definitely change a lot. Let's see, what else do we have? Summer says, "Are you going to start a regular schedule for going live?" I really should. I know I've been notifying people like um, just at random times. So my biggest thing this last few days was to figure out what kind of speed I'm going to be able to get, and if I can even stream. And like for now, it's just probably going to be 720 by 30 frame per second, which if it looks okay, that's fine. I've already scaled my monitor's actually set at 1080p so that it doesn't look as downscaled. Because I know that trying to show you guys 720p with a 1440p monitor just makes everything tiny. So I did do that, but yeah, definitely want to get on a regular schedule so that everybody kind of knows what to expect. And I'll probably do some early ones and some late ones so that everyone in the world who subscribes to the channel can get on if they want to. Because I do have a lot of subs from like India, I know for sure, and really just all over. So some early in the morning, some in the evening would let everybody hop on if they want. Um, yeah, let's see if we can get this to play back somewhat fast. It's really not too bad, but you could see if the sides of the ship were higher and we had a wider simulation, this would actually look really nice. So these edges of the displaced water here really want to turn over. It was easier to go over the top instead of push the wall. See, it's starting to right here. So I think that's going to look super cool because when we triple the resolution for the final, this is even going to be smaller. Because see this, the thickness of the water, if you will, is still only 4 or 5 voxels. So if I can make this about 3 times smaller voxels, then it would only be about this tall, or maybe like this tall. So it'd be really close. And then you get that nice like folding effect that you would expect a real wave to do. Um, and then when I spread out this simulation here, it should kind of ripple more this way too, kind of sideways. So, but yeah, definitely not looking too bad. Um, most of it at this point is going to be fine tuning and then sitting and waiting for hours and hours. And hopefully, I've done some of them overnight, and you just sit there and you go to bed and you get up and you hope that the simulation finished and didn't crash halfway through, because then you just have to restart it and sit and wait more. So, that's the game. So if I would say Flip Fluids is great. If you're going to do really big stuff, you might want to figure out how to fake it. And I tell people a lot, most of 3D art is learning how to cut corners convincingly. It's not learning how to make things realistic. So this might be one situation where that's a good idea. But I'm gonna actually stop this bake again and reset it, and then I'm gonna get my stuff set up here because I think we're ready to start getting toward the final one. So I'm going to spread this out pretty wide. So now what this will do is effectively decrease how specific our fluid is. So now all of a sudden you're going to have the same number of voxels. So we're back to having a lower resolution, if you will. Um, I've had a couple ideas on how to fix this. Since we're going to be using an alembic baked mesh, basically, we might be able to just cut this in half. So if I actually do like this and make it a small one longitudinally or along the boat, and then make it as wide like this, I could copy and paste 3 of these along the ship as it goes, and you wouldn't probably be able to tell that it was 3 different ones. So that's another option, because once we get this baked and we can copy and paste it as an object, it's going to be much easier to run than if we actually simulate this full ship length one. But um, this is easier to see what I'm doing. It's easier to like imagine how I'm setting it up. So it just kind of it depends on if you want to deal with large files or if you want to deal with small files and have to kind of patch them together. But we're going to try this. We're going to spread it out a little. And then I'm actually going to enter edit mode here, and we'll select, is it going to let me do that? I think so. See, control shift. Nope, 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 nope. It's not going to want to let me select all of my edge loops here. But I'm actually going to bring the sides of the ship up slightly so that we don't just have water going over the top, because that's not what we want. Nope, we're losing it. There we go. Okay. Yeah, there we go. And then let's just do it once and be done. So I'm just going to actually extrude these. Oh, let's just go up quite a bit. There's really no reason we can't go up as high as we want. And then I'm going to take all the top faces and delete them. Oops, there we go. Okay, and really we shouldn't need those faces, but we might as well put them back in just in case. So I'll just fill that. And it's not great topology, but it shouldn't confuse the simulation at all. But now this will force all the water to go to the side and not over the top. And then having the simulation wider over here should allow the wake to dissipate better. And then we're still on a low resolution, so let's just do something silly and go up to say 600. And then I'm going to save this because I have fears of computer explosions right now, but we'll see what happens. And we'll hit bake. Okay, so it moves the mesh through nicely. Let's just see how long a frame takes. Well, it's already generating a few of them. The problem is these first frames don't have the ship touching them yet. So it's literally just creating the surface object. Yeah, but we'll see. Oh yeah, that's looking nice and dense. Look at that. That should give us enough. So we'll see if this actually runs well. This might be one I sit for a few hours and just see. Because if the general mesh is done and it looks okay, then I'll throw on the whitewater and restart the bake, and then hopefully, see, it says it's going to take about an hour and a half. You know, hopefully 6, 7, 8 hours with the whitewater particles, it's all done and it just looks great. So, and then at that point, all we'd have to do is slap a material on, which does not change the bake. So once you've baked it, you just swap out materials, and that just goes on the render. So you don't have to have the material picked beforehand. But then we swap out all the materials, bake it as alembic, and then send it over to MRU Studios, and um, we can get on and see how they line up and kind of tweak materials and stuff from there. But I think it's going to come together just fine. Hopefully these frames will look decent. Yeah, so all it's really done so far is just settled the fluid out. So when you start a simulation, the very first step is just to have the fluid react to gravity and sit where it would just without touching anything. I was in edit mode that whole time. That's funny. That probably wasn't helping my case. Yeah, so your first frames here, it's just going to settle out. That's all it's going to do. So that's what I was saying earlier when I run these simulations, like imagine I have a character walking in water. I'm going to have the water settle out first or start flowing or whatever it's doing, and then waste those first 60 or 70 or 100 frames and then have the character interact with it. So it's kind of tricky. I wish there was a different way to do it. I suppose you could sculpt the water to be kind of the shape you wanted first, but there's only so much you can do. How far are we? It's definitely not fast, but it is generating them. I'd like to at least get to the point where you guys can see the mesh deforming around the ship, because then at least we have kind of a conclusion. And then between now and the next time you see it, it's just going to be hours and hours of baking, and hopefully no more iterations, but we'll see. Let's see, it says it has 88 done. Type that in. Yeah, just sitting there. That's all right. We'll, we've got to just wait it out anyway at some point, but yeah, and even this resolution might be too much. I'm not sure. You can always back it off, but like if the ship gets in there and it's taking 12 or 15 minutes per frame, we also know that the simulation file is going to be too big to send or manage. Yeah, see our surface is already a gig, so we've already got 1.03 gigabytes of total bake size for this thing, and we've only got 5% of the frames done, and we haven't even started getting waves yet. So that's kind of the problem. Let's see what do we got here. Oh yeah, there you go, Edgar. If you're still in here, now you can see the deal. So yeah, I think you're right though about maybe getting some overclock or new thermal paste maybe. Looks like it goes between about 4 and 4.5 gigahertz. I should really get hardware monitor up, but this isn't necessarily a hardware stream. Um, really, I should do some hardware monitor testing on baking though, because outside of like Cinebench, this is about the most intense you can run a processor, I think. I just really, really wish they'd find a way to do this on a GPU. I'm very partial to GPUs, but all right, what are we at? 30, which is frame 101. So let's type that in and see where that is. Oh, we're getting there. Okay, so the ship should be interacting with it now. I need to back it off by one because it's working on 101. Yeah. Oh, not quite. Not quite there. Yep, needs just a couple. CPU rendering is worse. Yeah, yeah. CPU rendering is worse. That's true. Um, because if you look at the chart, it's not running the cores 100% of the time. So I suppose that's why the clock speed jumps and varies so much. So I think full bore it's probably 4.5, but rendering would actually put every thread at 100% for the entire time. So that's a good point. Or one, okay, so we can actually go forward a few now. So let's just see how long. So right here, I'll click, and then it moves. It takes a very long time. But look at this little tiny front corner. You can already see the difference it's making. So before we just had these like massive lumps that were basically flying over the top of the ship. Well, now look at it. It's going to be a nice little tiny wave right there. Yeah, so I think this is actually going to look really cool. And this isn't even going to be too bad. So, I mean, it's going to be a massive file, so I'll have to check how much hard drive space I have, which is fine. Um, yeah, yeah. If you were going to get a system for this type of work, I would definitely get storage high up on your list. But yeah, see now every frame, the surface size goes up 5 or 10 megabytes or more. It's getting pretty bad. Noticed a stupid error in my work presentation that I rendered at home and had to render it in the office with the i7 laptop and CPU rendering. Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I started on Blender 2.8. That's when I started my Blender journey, and back then, a modern CPU that was high end was a lot closer to a GPU, and just now, there's absolutely no way even the best processors can keep up with something like an RTX 4090. The For rendering, that is for rendering. Quarter resolution, 20 to 30 samples, high noise threshold, and the laptop sounded like a jet engine. Yeah, yep. And that's what's crazy is GPUs can't really do a simulation like this because of the data dependence from frame to frame. But processors can't render anywhere near as well as a GPU because it's just all pixels. It's just like gaming. So um, CPUs in a game do all the physics, just like we're doing here on this simulation, and GPUs do all the pixels, which is just the pretty picture. So yeah, pretty cool. What are we at? What are we at? 119. This isn't moving too slow. I'm glad. I would like to see. I would like to see this kind of a scene on like a. I don't know. I suppose the high core ones, the clock goes down, but maybe like the 32 core Threadrippers. 32 cores at like 4.3 or 4.4 gigahertz. That would be pretty cool. I imagine that would help. But yeah, here we go. Now, the only problem I have is the fluid is hitting the top of the domain here. So, like, unfortunately, if this is a big enough of a problem, I'll have to restart this bake. So, which is the maybe I should find a better way to test these, but that's the problem with this type of simulation is it's just tweak a setting, run it, see what it looks like, tweak a setting. It's just over and over and over. But we'll see after this first contact with the water. Maybe the waves won't be so extreme. Because really, what we want is when the ship is kind of halfway into it, we'll take the surface from there on, and we'll have it trail the ship. But let's see. What can we get to now? 125, 124. Okay. Honestly, it probably doesn't look too bad. Yeah, that's not too bad. I think from the top, you wouldn't be able to tell that it's hitting a plane because the other thing that we'll have is all those whitewater particles on there. And I don't know. I still you can see that like this here is kind of the minimum size of the voxel though. I'm sitting here wondering if this is still too low of a resolution. But we'll see after a few more frames what it ends up looking like. I mean it definitely looks good. It's just my very first thought is I've never seen water that lumpy, you know. But it is what it is, and we can decide as we go how much detail we really think we need. But the other thing I think I can probably do is make this not quite as thick because all of the depth of this fluid is wasted. So none of this part down here will ever be seen. Um, Once we get the ocean modifier on there. So realistically, I could shrink this up quite a lot and move it up so we don't have to use as much resolution. Yeah, maybe I'll try that next time. Yep, but yeah, that's about it. So for this topic, it's all just sitting and waiting now. So I might run a couple different checks here, and I'll let the stream run. But that's more or less it for this topic for today. I'll have to meet up with MRU Studios again soon, and so we can compare materials and stuff, and figure out how to bake this. So that would be another good next step for the next live stream on this topic. But yeah, stick around if you just want to hang out. Otherwise, I'll just be tweaking this for a little bit. But I'll keep playing with it, and once everybody's over it, I'll shut her down for the day. But yeah, thanks for coming. I like this live streaming stuff. I think it's fun. If you haven't noticed yet, I like to just talk and talk. And you know, live streaming is the best way for me to just have a ongoing conversation. So I'm glad I finally started kind of figuring it out. But if somebody knows Elon Musk personally, maybe just text him and say that I need a little bit better upload speed. So I don't know. Edgar, hope maybe you know Elon Musk. Who knows? Somebody ought to. But yeah, if we could just get up to maybe 1080p, that would be nice. But anyway, thanks for coming. It's a blast to have you on the channel, and we'll see you again soon. Yeah, you too. You too. Thanks for coming by. That's MRU Studios. We're gonna do some cool stuff. I'm excited. All right, let's maybe bump this resolution up. Move our plane down. Scale this by Z. Maybe I'll just leave it there too. That might look just perfect actually. Then it can splash higher and roll over without hitting the top. Let's see where the boundary thickness is though. Oh yeah, that's way too big. We don't want the water to just sit down on the bottom. Man, that's kind of hard to see. Display grid off. There we go. And I don't need to scale it more than Z. Just move it down. And then move the entire thing up to go back to about where I was. Oh yeah, that's gonna look good. $600. Go to 750. Save. All right. Yeah, if anyone's still here, I think I'm gonna close her down now. Thanks for watching. Um, I bumped up the resolution, moved the fluid up a little, and made it thinner so that we don't waste so much resource on calculating the underside of it. And now it's really just going to take a long, 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 long time to bake this. So I'm just going to let it sit. Uh, but I'll have results, and hopefully you can see the finished version of it on MRU Studios channel here soon. So be watching that as well. And yeah, otherwise, thanks for watching and have a good weekend.